The darkness is absolute at 77 degrees south latitude, a darkness so complete that it swallows even the memory of light. You wouldn't last a day here, not a single day in this void, where Ernest Shackleton and his men drifted for months, their ship Endurance locked in the merciless grip of pack ice that stretches beyond every horizon. It begins with a gentle rocking, the kind that lulls you into a false sense of security. The wooden hull of the Endurance creaks beneath you, a sound you'll come to know intimately over the endless Antarctic night. The temperature has dropped to 40 degrees below zero, and the air itself seems to crystallize with each exhale. Your breath hangs before you, a ghost that dissipates into the darkness of the cramped quarters where 27 men have made their home in this frozen desert. Sleep doesn't come easily here. The constant grinding of ice against the ship's hull makes sure of that. It's a sound unlike anything you've ever heard before, ancient, patient, and utterly indifferent to your existence. Sometimes it's a low moan that reverberates through the timbers, other times a sharp crack that jolts you awake with the certainty that the end has come. The ice is speaking to you in a language of pressure and patience. It has all the time in the world. You don't. Shackleton knew this when he set out in 1914 to cross the Antarctic continent. He knew the ice was a living entity with its own agenda. What the ice gets, the ice keeps, goes the old sailor's adage. You understand this now, lying in your bunk as the temperature plummets further, making the metal frame bite into your skin, even through layers of wool and fur. The ship is heated, yes, but heat is relative in a place where nature has declared war on warmth itself. Morning comes without the sun. In the Antarctic winter, darkness reigns for months at a time. Your body loses track of time. Your mind begins to wander into strange corridors of thought. The crew maintains a strict schedule: breakfast at 8:30, lunch at 1, dinner at 6. But these divisions feel artificial, human constructs, imposed on a landscape that operates on geological time frames. The ice doesn't care about your schedules, or your hunger, or your gradually fraying sanity. You rise from your bunk, joints stiff and aching from the cold. Your cabin mates stir around you, each man wrapped in his own private suffering, each face bearing the early signs of the ordeal to come. Outside, beyond the wooden walls that suddenly seem fragile, lies an ocean turned solid, stretching in every direction for hundreds of miles. This is not the sea you know from temperate climes. This is not water that submits to hulls and propellers. This is a different element entirely, patient, implacable, alive. Breakfast is hardtack biscuits and tea so sweet it makes your teeth ache. Sugar is energy, and energy is survival. You've learned to associate the cloying sweetness with life itself. Frank Worsley, the captain, studies his charts at the table, though they've become largely irrelevant. The Endurance is no longer a ship navigating water, but a reluctant passenger on a slow-moving continent of ice. Your position changes not by your own power, but by the drift of the pack, pulled by currents you cannot see beneath thousands of feet of frozen water. Shackleton moves among the men, his voice steady, his eyes holding something that might be concern or might be calculation. "It's the ice, sir," someone says, voicing what everyone is thinking. "It's getting worse. The pressure of millions of tons of pack ice is increasing around the hull." The ship groans in protest, timbers flexing beyond their design limits. "We've seen worse," Shackleton replies, though everyone knows this is false comfort. "None of you have seen worse. This is already the worst it has ever been, and it will only get worse still. You pull on layer after layer of clothing to prepare for your watch on deck. First woolen underwear, then a flannel shirt, then a wool sweater, followed by a coat made from reindeer fur. Your feet disappear into multiple pairs of socks before being encased in boots lined with felt and straw. Your hands vanish into mittens, so thick you can barely grasp anything. By the time you're dressed, you feel like a child, clumsy, bulky, reduced to basic movements. The cold that greets you on deck defies description. It is not just an absence of heat, but an active force that seeks out every gap in your clothing, every exposed millimeter of skin. It burns like fire. Ironically enough, your eyes water and the tears freeze on your lashes. Your nostril hairs stiffen and break. Your breath freezes in your beard, building up over hours until your face is encased in a mask of ice. The horizon is a theoretical concept now. In every direction, there is only ice and darkness. The ice field stretches away from the ship, its surface a chaos of pressure ridges and chasms. Occasionally, the moon appears from behind the clouds, casting an eerie blue light over the landscape, transforming it into something alien and hostile. During these moments of illumination, you can see the extent of your imprisonment. The Endurance, once a proud vessel, now looks like a toy caught in a giant's freezing hand. Your watch consists of 4 hours of scanning the ice field for any changes, any movement, any sign that the pressure might be easing. But mostly, it's 4 hours of fighting the cold, of reminding yourself to move your toes inside your boots to keep the circulation going, of beating your arms against your sides to maintain some semblance of warmth. Your mind wanders in the monotony. You think of home, of warmth, of light. You think of green things growing, of running water, of birds singing, all concepts that seem mythical here in this frozen hell. Below deck, the routine of ship life continues, a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy. The cook prepares meals on a stove that serves as the heart of the ship, both literally and figuratively. Men gather around it, drawn to its warmth, like moths to flame. Conversations happen in hushed tones, as if speaking loudly might attract the attention of whatever malevolent force controls the ice. The dogs, the ship carries several dozen sledding dogs, are kept in dogloos on the ice beside the ship. Their howls punctuate the endless night, sometimes mournful, sometimes eerily jubilant. They are working animals, not pets, but in this extreme environment, the line blurs. The men visit them during their watches, talking to them as if they might answer back. In the void of the Antarctic, any living thing becomes precious company. Weeks pass. The ice tightens its grip. The hull of the Endurance begins to bend inward in places, the solid oak timbers flexing like green twigs. Water starts to seep in, requiring constant pumping. The men work in shifts, their muscles burning with the effort, their hands numb despite the work. It becomes clear that this is a losing battle. On October 27, 1915, Shackleton gives the order to abandon ship. "She's going, boys," he says simply. There is no panic, no rush, just a quiet, determined evacuation of the vessel that has been your home for over a year. Essential supplies are offloaded onto the ice: tents, sleeping bags, food, cooking equipment, and the small boats that may one day carry you to safety, though that day seems impossibly distant now. You stand on the ice and watch as the Endurance, caught in the merciless grip of the pack, is slowly crushed. Her timbers splinter with sounds like gunshots, her masts tilt at impossible angles. The portrait of Edward VII, which has hung in the mess, is carefully removed and placed on the ice, a strange piece of civilization in this wilderness of white. Shackleton is the last to leave the ship, bringing the ship's Bible with him. Now, home is a collection of canvas tents, pitched on the ice. The temperature inside these tents is barely higher than outside. You sleep in a reindeer skin sleeping bag, your body heat your only source of warmth. The sleeping bags grow stiff with frozen breath and sweat, requiring them to be thawed alongside your body each night. Privacy is a memory. Personal space doesn't exist. 27 men live on top of each other, their bodily functions, their snores, their nightmares all shared in a brutal intimacy. The food supplies are rationed with scientific precision. Each man receives a precise allocation, so many ounces of pemmican, so many biscuits, so much sugar. The sledding dogs, once essential for the planned crossing of Antarctica, now represent a walking larder of fresh meat. The men avoid thinking about this inevitable conclusion too directly, but hunger has a way of reshaping morality. Days blend into one another. The ice continues its slow, inexorable drift northward, carrying you with it. Routines are established, roles assigned. The photographer, Frank Hurley, documents your plight with his camera, somehow managing to develop his plates in this frozen wasteland. The doctor, Alexander Macklin, tends to frostbite, snow blindness, and the countless other ailments that plague men living in conditions humans were never meant to endure. You wouldn't last a day here, not a single day in this methodical breakdown of body and spirit, and yet, somehow, these men endure. They play cards in the dim light of blubber lamps. They stage football matches on the ice. They celebrate Christmas with a feast of seal meat and a small extra ration of chocolate. They hold onto their humanity with a grip as tenuous as their hold on life itself. The drift continues. The ice beneath you, once seemingly solid as stone, reveals itself to be fickle and treacherous. Cracks appear without warning. Men fall into the freezing water and are pulled out, their wet clothes freezing instantly into carapaces of ice. They must be thawed slowly, carefully, to avoid the tissue damage that could mean death in this environment. The sun returns after months of darkness, a pale disk that barely clears the horizon. Its light reveals the full extent of your situation, the endless ice, the absence of any feature that might indicate land or open water. You are adrift in a frozen ocean, your fate determined by currents and winds you cannot control. Shackleton decides that the men must march across the ice, dragging the lifeboats behind them, in an attempt to reach open water or land. It is a desperate plan, but desperation is all that remains. The march begins, each man assigned to a team, each team responsible for a boat or sledge of supplies. The ice is not smooth but a chaotic landscape of pressure ridges and crevasses. Progress is measured in yards, not miles. Your world narrows to the next step, the next pull on the ropes, the next breath that burns your lungs with cold. Your feet are never warm, never dry. Frostbite is a constant companion, turning toes and fingers black with dead tissue. The doctor amputates what he must, working with basic instruments in conditions that would horrify any medical professional back in civilization. After a week of back-breaking effort, you've covered less than a mile. The ice is too rough, the boat's too heavy. Shackleton calls a halt to the march. A new plan is needed. You establish Patience Camp on a large ice floe, settling in to wait for the drift to carry you closer to land or open water. Life at Patience Camp is an exercise in endurance. The tents provide minimal shelter from the elements. Blizzards bury you for days at a time, the snow piling so high that men must dig their way out each morning. Food becomes an obsession. Men talk of meals they've eaten, recipes they know, the taste of fresh bread and hot coffee. These conversations are both torture and comfort. The drift continues. Months pass. The ice floe beneath you shrinks as it moves northward into warmer waters. What was once a solid platform becomes a fragile raft, cracking and reforming around you. The men sleep in their boots now, ready to move at a moment's notice if the ice should split beneath their tents. And then, finally, open water appears on the horizon. After months of imprisonment in the ice, the sight of liquid ocean is almost shocking, a reminder that the world contains states of matter other than solid. Shackleton gives the order to launch the boats. The James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, 3 small lifeboats that must now carry 27 men across some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. You wouldn't last a day in those open boats, not a single day in the freezing spray and towering waves of the Southern Ocean. The men are divided among the 3 vessels. You find yourself in the James Caird, the largest of the 3, at just 22 feet long. 22 feet holds 6 men and supplies for a journey of unknown duration. The boats launch from the edge of the ice into the heaving ocean. Immediately, freezing spray drenches everyone. There is nowhere to escape it, nowhere to get dry. Your clothes, your sleeping bag, your food, everything is wet with salt water that refuses to evaporate in the cold air. Your hands crack and bleed from the salt and cold. Your lips split. Your eyes burn from the constant spray. The ice retreats behind you, but this brings no relief. You have traded one prison for another, the immobility of the pack ice for the ceaseless motion of the open ocean. The waves in the Southern Ocean are like no others on Earth, uninterrupted by land masses as they circle the globe, building to heights that make your small boat seem insignificant. Walls of water, 20 feet high, 30 feet high, lift you up and drop you down with sickening regularity. Shackleton has determined that Elephant Island, a remote, uninhabited outcropping of rock at the edge of the Antarctic Peninsula, is your best hope for landfall, but finding a small island in the vast Southern Ocean requires navigation of extraordinary precision. Frank Worsley, the captain, must take sightings with his sextant during the brief moments when the sun appears between clouds, balancing precariously in the pitching boat, his fingers numb from cold. The work of keeping the boats afloat is constant. You bail continuously, your hands numb and useless, moving mechanically to scoop freezing water out of the bottom of the boat. If you stop, the boat will sink. It's that simple. There is no rest, no respite. The boats must be steered, the sails adjusted, the ice cleared from the rigging. All this must be done with hands so cold they might as well belong to someone else, with bodies weakened by months of inadequate nutrition. Sleep comes in snatches, if at all. There is no comfortable position in a boat crowded with men and supplies, everything wet, everything cold. When exhaustion finally pulls you under, your dreams are vivid and disorienting, visions of warmth, of home, of safety, that make waking to your desperate reality all the more cruel. Food is limited to what could be carried from patient's camp. Pemmican, a concentrated mixture of fat and protein, is the staple, supplemented by biscuits, and whatever seals or penguins might be caught when the boats briefly land on ice floes. Water comes from collecting ice that forms on the boat itself, melted in your mouth, or in the small stove when fuel allows. The journey to Elephant Island takes 7 days, 7 days of constant motion, constant wet, constant cold, 7 days of salt water sores that won't heal, of muscles cramped from inactivity and poor nutrition, of the gradual realization that the human body and mind can endure far more than seems possible. On April 15th, 1916, the boats finally reach Elephant Island, the site of solid ground. Even the forbidding black rock that pokes through the snow evokes an emotion so profound it defies naming. Men weep openly, their tears freezing on wind-burned cheeks. Some fall to their knees upon landing, kissing the rocky shore, while others are so weakened they must be carried. But Elephant Island is no sanctuary. It is a desolate place, uninhabited and uninhabitable. There are no ships that pass this way, no chance of rescue unless it is actively sought. The island offers shelter from the ocean, but little else. No food beyond the seals and penguins that can be hunted, no fuel except for blubber, no comfort beyond the relative stability of solid ground. Shackleton realizes quickly that Elephant Island cannot be more than a temporary refuge. The nearest outpost of civilization is the whaling station at South Georgia Island, some 800 miles across the Southern Ocean. Without external rescue, which seems unlikely given that World War I rages in Europe and no one knows your location, a smaller party must make this journey to bring help back. The James Caird is chosen for this impossible voyage. It is the largest and most seaworthy of the three boats, though calling any 22-foot open boats seaworthy for an 800-mile journey through the Southern Ocean seems an act of desperate optimism. Shackleton selects 5 men to accompany him: Frank Worsley for his navigation skills, Tom Crean for his strength and reliability, and 3 others chosen for their complementary abilities. The boat is modified as best as possible with the limited tools available. The carpenter, McNeesha, builds up the sides with canvas to provide more freeboard against the waves. A deck of sorts is fashioned from canvas and wood salvaged from packing cases. Ballast, stones gathered from the beach, is placed in the bottom of the boat to provide stability. The remaining men, 21 in number, will stay on Elephant Island under the command of Frank Wild, Shackleton's trusted second. They establish a makeshift camp, overturning the 2 remaining boats to create crude shelters. Their task is simple but daunting: stay alive until rescue comes, however long that might take. On April 24th, 1916, the James Caird launches from Elephant Island. The 6 men aboard face perhaps the most dangerous small boat journey ever attempted. The Southern Ocean in autumn is a place of continuous storms, massive waves, and freezing temperatures. The boat is heavily laden with supplies and ballast, riding low in the water. Every wave that breaks over it adds weight in the form of water that must be bailed out by hand. You wouldn't last a day in those conditions. Not a single day in that tiny boat, being tossed about like a cork on waters that have claimed countless larger vessels. The men take watch in pairs, one steering, one bailing, while the others try to find what rest they can in the cramped, wet space beneath the canvas deck. There is no dry spot anywhere on the boat. Everything, clothes, sleeping bags, food, is soaked with freezing salt water. Navigation is a near impossible task. To take a sighting with the sextant, Worsley must stand up in the pitching boat, catching a glimpse of the sun when it briefly appears between clouds. His calculations are made with fingers so numb he can barely hold a pencil on paper so wet the ink spreads in blue clouds. Yet somehow, through skill or miracle, he maintains their course towards South Georgia. The physical toll is enormous. The constant wet and cold lead to immersion foot, a painful condition where the skin begins to die from prolonged exposure to moisture. Saltwater sores develop where wet clothing rubs against skin, impossible to keep clean, impossible to heal in these conditions. The men's hands are cut and bleeding from handling rough ropes and sails. Their faces are blistered from the combination of salt spray, wind, and the occasional glimpse of sun. Food must be rationed, with even greater strictness than before. Each man receives a small portion of pemmican and a biscuit at fixed intervals. Thirst becomes a constant companion, as drinking the seawater that surrounds them would only hasten death. They collect rainwater when possible and melt ice that forms on the boat, but there is never enough. Sleep deprivation adds a hallucinatory quality to the journey. Men report seeing extra people on the boat, hearing phantom voices calling from the waves. These episodes are acknowledged, but not dwelt upon. Madness lies that way, and madness cannot be afforded. On the 7th day of the voyage, a hurricane-force storm hits. Waves tower over the tiny boat, some estimated at 50 feet high. The James Caird climbs up the face of these liquid mountains and plunges down the other side, each descent a free fall that slams the boat into the trough with bone-jarring force. Water pours in, faster than it can be bailed out. The situation seems hopeless, yet the boat survives. The men take turns at the tiller, steering into the waves to prevent capsizing, their arms burning with the effort of holding course against the force of the water. They bail continuously, passing the tin cup from hand to hand without pause. They endure hour after hour of conditions that should, by all logic, have overwhelmed their tiny vessel. And then, incredibly, the storm passes. The James Caird is still afloat, still on course, according to Worsley's calculations. The men are exhausted beyond description, but alive. The journey continues. On May 8th, 14 days after leaving Elephant Island, land is sighted. South Georgia looms on the horizon, its peaks wreathed in clouds. But the ordeal is not over. The approach to land is dangerous, with reefs and hidden rocks threatening to tear the bottom out of the boat that has carried them so far. And the west coast of South Georgia, where they find themselves, is uninhabited. The whaling stations are on the eastern side of the island. They make landfall in King Haakon Bay, a small inlet that offers shelter from the open ocean. For the first time in 2 weeks, the men step onto solid ground, their legs, weak from confinement and poor nutrition, barely support them. They laugh at the strange sensation of stillness beneath their feet after so long at sea. But South Georgia is a mountainous island, its interior crossed by glaciers and peaks that have never been traversed. The whaling stations lie on the opposite coast, separated from their landing spot by some of the most difficult terrain imaginable. The boat, damaged by the journey and unsafe for further open ocean travel, cannot take them around the island's coast. Shackleton makes another impossible decision. He will cross the island on foot with 2 companions, Worsley and Crean, while the other 3 men, too weakened by the journey to attempt the crossing, will remain at King Haakon Bay to recover. The crossing of South Georgia is an epic in itself. Without a map, without proper mountaineering equipment, without adequate food or rest, the 3 men set out to traverse glaciers, climb peaks, and descend treacherous slopes. They carry minimal supplies, a ship's compass, a rope, a carpenter's adze to serve as an ice axe, and whatever food they can carry in their pockets. For 36 hours straight, they march without stopping to sleep. The terrain forces them to climb up to 4,500 feet elevation, crossing glaciers, riddled with hidden crevasses, scaling near vertical rock faces, and descending slopes so steep that their only option is to slide down on their backs, using the adze as a brake. At one point, night falls while they are high on a mountainside, too dangerous to continue in darkness. Too cold to stop moving, they face an impossible choice. Shackleton makes the decision to slide down into the unknown, hoping the slope leads to safety rather than a cliff edge or crevasse. The three men sit on the frozen snow, link arms, and push off into the darkness, sliding at increasing speed down the mountainside, the Adzi dragging behind them as their only brake. Miraculously, the slope flattens out safely. They continue their march through the night and into the next day. Their clothing, inadequate to begin with, is in tatters. Their boots are falling apart. They have not slept for nearly 2 days. But sometime in the early morning hours of May 20th, 1916, they hear a sound that stops them in their tracks, the whistle of the whaling station at Stromness Bay. The descent into the whaling station is the final challenge. Filthy, bearded, clothes in rags, they must look more like wild men than shipwrecked sailors. The Norwegian whalers who first spot them are understandably cautious. But when Shackleton identifies himself, the response is immediate and overwhelming. We had been given up for dead for 2 years. The station manager tells them the outside world had long since abandoned hope of finding the Endurance expedition alive. The rescue of the men left behind now becomes the priority. Those on Elephant Island have been waiting for 4 months, with no way of knowing if Shackleton's desperate gamble succeeded. Those left at King Haakon Bay must also be retrieved. Multiple attempts are made to reach Elephant Island, but pack ice blocks the approach each time. It is not until August 30th, 1916, more than 4 months after Shackleton left in the James Caird, that a Chilean steamer finally breaks through to Elephant Island. Frank Wild and his 20 men are found alive, having survived on penguin and seal meat, maintaining their faith that Shackleton would return as promised. Remarkably, every single man who sailed on the Endurance survives to return home. In the midst of World War I, their ordeal receives less attention than it might have in peacetime. Many of the men go directly from rescue to military service. Some do not survive the war, having cheated death in Antarctica only to meet it on European battlefields. Shackleton himself never fully recovers from the ordeal, though he mounts another Antarctic expedition in 1921. His health is broken. He dies of a heart attack at the beginning of that voyage, at the age of 47. He is buried on South Georgia, the island he crossed in that desperate march to save his men. You wouldn't last a day in the conditions these men endured for nearly 2 years. The combination of extreme cold, constant danger, inadequate food, and complete isolation from the outside world would break most modern humans within hours, not days. Yet these men, using equipment now considered primitive, without radio communication, without modern navigation aids, without waterproof or thermal clothing, survived one of the most extreme survival situations in human history. Their story stands as testament to human endurance, to leadership in crisis, and to the bonds that form between men facing death together. It is a story of failure transformed. The crossing of Antarctica was never achieved. The Endurance was lost, the scientific objectives abandoned, yet from this failure emerged a triumph of the human spirit that continues to inspire more than a century later. The sand of time has nearly buried their story, as it buries all human endeavors eventually, but in the quiet moments, when the lights are low and sleep approaches, their ghost ship still sails through the pack ice of our collective imagination, a reminder of what can be endured when there is no other choice. In the crushing silence of Antarctic isolation, it's the noise inside your mind that becomes the most dangerous enemy. The physical challenges of Shackleton's journey, the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, are tangible enemies that can be fought with action. But the psychological burden of endless white emptiness creates a different kind of battle, one fought in the echoing chambers of your consciousness. You wouldn't last a day with the mental assault that comes in this frozen wasteland. Not a single day with the thoughts that begin to circle like hungry predators when the external world offers nothing but ice and darkness. The men of the endurance expedition faced this void for months on end, their minds becoming both sanctuary and prison. The human brain is not designed for the sensory deprivation of Antarctic winter. In the absence of varied external stimuli, the mind begins to create its own hallucinations that seem as real as the ice beneath your feet. Men report seeing impossible things, ships on the horizon where no ships could be, figures walking across the ice that vanish when approached, colors in the sky that defy description. These visions are discussed in hushed tones. If at all, to acknowledge them too openly feels like admitting a dangerous weakness. The constant noise of the ice becomes a soundtrack that follows you into sleep, when sleep comes at all. The grinding, creaking, cracking sounds of the pack pressing against the ship form patterns that the mind desperately tries to organize into something familiar. Voices, music, the sounds of home. You find yourself listening for messages in the random chorus of ice movement, your brain searching for meaning where none exists. Time loses its meaning in the eternal darkness of polar winter. The artifice of watches and schedules becomes painfully evident, human constructs imposed on a landscape that operates on geological timescales. Minutes stretch into hours when you're on watch, scanning the featureless horizon for any change. Days blur together, distinguished only by the monotonous rotation of duties and meals. Memory becomes both comfort and torment. You recall with painful clarity the taste of fresh fruit, the sensation of warm sunlight on bare skin, the sound of a loved one's voice. These memories are treasures to be rationed, taken out and examined briefly before being carefully stored away again. To dwell too long on what you've lost is to risk a despair that might never release its grip. Dreams are vivid and disorienting, often more real than waking life. Men report elaborate dreamscapes of home, of warmth, of safety, so convincing that waking to the cramped cold reality of the tent or ship's quarters is a fresh trauma each morning. Some begin to look forward to sleep, not for its physical restoration, but for this temporary escape, a dangerous preference that Shackleton watches for with concern. Conversation becomes both essential and exhausting. The same 27 men, with no new experiences or information coming from outside, quickly exhaust obvious topics. Discussions become circular, revisiting well-trodden subjects with diminishing returns. Yet silence is equally dangerous, allowing the mind to spiral inward to darker places. A delicate balance must be maintained. Enough talk to stave off isolation, enough quiet to avoid friction. Personal habits that would pass unnoticed in normal circumstances become magnified to unbearable proportions. The way a man chews his food, clears his throat, or snores at night can transform from minor annoyance to consuming irritation when experienced day after day in close quarters. Small kindnesses and courtesies become acts of heroism in this environment, requiring conscious effort when every impulse drives toward irritability. The psychological pressure creates strange contradictions. Men simultaneously crave both solitude and company, desperate for a moment alone, yet terrified of being truly isolated. They hunger for novelty, yet cling to routine as a shield against the formlessness of their days. They wish for rescue, yet fear the adjustment back to a world that has continued without them, that might no longer have a place for them. Throughout all this, Shackleton demonstrates his true genius as a leader. He recognizes the psychological dangers as clearly as the physical ones, perhaps more clearly. He institutes rituals and routines that give structure to shapeless time, regular meals, duty rotations, Saturday night concerts, Sunday services, regardless of individual religious conviction. He assigns men to tent groups and boat crews with careful attention to compatible personalities, separating those who might spark against each other too violently. Most importantly, Shackleton understands the power of purpose. Men can endure almost anything if they believe it serves a meaningful end. When the original expedition objective, crossing Antarctica, becomes impossible with the loss of the Endurance, he immediately replaces it with a new purpose: survival and return. Every action, every decision, every sacrifice is framed within this mission. There is no room for the existential question of why bother that can paralyze men in extremis. Yet even with Shackleton's leadership, the mental strain takes its toll. The men develop coping mechanisms of varying effectiveness. Some retreat into themselves, becoming increasingly quiet and observant. Others become more talkative, filling silence with words, as if they might build a wall against the void. Some focus obsessively on specific tasks or skills, Hurley with his photography, Worsley with his navigational calculations, McNeish with his carpentry. Dreams of food become a shared obsession. Men discuss recipes and meals in excruciating detail, describing the texture, aroma, and flavor of dishes they've eaten or hope to eat again. These conversations, which might seem torturous given their limited rations, actually serve as a form of psychological nourishment, a way of experiencing through imagination what cannot be had in reality. The sound of water dripping inside the tents becomes maddening, a constant reminder of the precariousness of your shelter. During blizzards, the canvas walls press inward with each gust, sometimes touching your face as you lie in your sleeping bag, creating a momentary sensation of suffocation before retreating. The boundary between safety and death feels tissue-thin. On Elephant Island, waiting through the long months after Shackleton's departure in the James Caird, the psychological burden grows even heavier. There is no way of knowing if the mission succeeded, if help is coming tomorrow or never. Frank Wilde, left in charge, faces the monumental task of maintaining morale in this limbo. Each morning, he wakes the men with the same words: "Roll up your bags, boys, the boss may come today." The noise inside your mind grows loudest when the external world is at its quietest, during the rare moments when the wind stops its howling and the ice ceases its grinding. A silence descends that seems to have physical weight. In these moments, thoughts echo with terrible clarity. Questions you've managed to avoid come rushing to the surface. Will I ever see home again? Will anyone remember me if I die here? What meaning can be found in this suffering? You wouldn't last a day with these thoughts circling like hungry wolves. Not a single day with the psychological isolation that comes from being cut off from the wider world, from news, from correspondence, from the thousand small connections that anchor identity. These men endured it for nearly 2 years, their only company each other and the thoughts inside their heads. The experience changes them in ways that will never fully heal. Those who survive to return home find themselves altered, carrying the ice within them long after they've left it behind physically. Some report dreams of Antarctica for the rest of their lives, not nightmares necessarily, but vivid returns to that world of white and blue, that place where existence was stripped to its barest elements. Some find it difficult to readjust to civilization, to the petty concerns and social niceties that once seemed natural. After living with the daily reality of survival, the artificial constructs of modern life appear transparent, and sometimes meaningless. Relationships formed in the ice prove stronger than many forged in comfort, a bond of shared extremity that cannot be explained to those who weren't there. The noise inside your mind during such an ordeal leaves permanent echoes. The men develop an ability to go away inside themselves, to retreat to an inner room when external circumstances become unbearable. This skill, essential for survival in Antarctica, proves both blessing and curse in normal life, a capacity for detachment that can protect from pain but also separate from joy. For some, the experience becomes the defining event of their lives, the standard against which all other experiences are measured and found wanting in intensity, if not in pleasure. They find themselves drawn to other challenges, other expeditions, unable to settle into conventional existence. Others want nothing more than quiet routine, having had enough of adventure to last several lifetimes. Shackleton himself seems unable to exist outside the framework of exploration. Between expeditions, he grows restless and disconnected, his legendary focus dispersing in the absence of immediate crisis. Only when planning or leading a journey does he seem fully present, fully alive. The noise in his mind quiets only when faced with the tangible challenges of ice and ocean. The psychological dimension of the endurance expedition rarely features prominently in abbreviated accounts. The physical drama, the crushing of the ship, the boat journey, the crossing of South Georgia, provides more immediate narrative appeal. But it is the inner journey that represents the greater marathon, the more profound test of human capacity. The men lived for months, with nothing but the contents of their minds for company, adrift on an ocean of ice and time. In the modern world, with its constant stimulation and connection, such isolation is almost incomprehensible. Most people never experience even an hour of true sensory deprivation. The thought of months without external input, without news or entertainment or fresh conversation, is more alien than the Antarctic landscape itself. This may be the aspect of Shackleton's journey that most separates it from contemporary experience, more so even than the physical hardships. You wouldn't last a day with only the noise in your mind for company, not a single day without the 1,000 distractions that buffer modern consciousness from itself. These men lasted months, and in doing so demonstrated a psychological endurance as remarkable as their physical survival. They navigated the treacherous geography of isolation and emerged, changed but intact, on the other shore. The ice that surrounded them was silent, patient, indifferent to their presence. But the noise that filled their minds, fears, hopes, memories, dreams, was loud enough to drown in. That they kept swimming through those turbulent mental waters day after day, may be their greatest achievement of all. The return from Antarctica was not the end of the journey, but rather the beginning of a different kind of challenge. You wouldn't last a day with the aftermath of such an experience, not a single day with the knowledge that the most intense, most meaningful period of your life is behind you, that nothing to come will ever match the clarity and purpose of those months on the ice. The hill that swallows the brave is not a physical obstacle, but the long slope that follows the summit, the gradual descent into ordinary existence after touching the extreme edge of human experience. For the men of the endurance expedition, this transition was made more abrupt by their return to a world transformed by war, a world that had little attention to spare for polar adventures when millions were dying in European trenches. They stepped from one impossible landscape to another. The frozen waste of Antarctica was replaced by the cratered moonscape of the Western Front. Several of the crew enlisted immediately upon return, trading the fight against nature for the fight against other men. Some, like physicist Reginald James and geologist James Wordy, put their scientific training to use in the war effort. Others, like First Officer Lionel Greenstreet, joined the Merchant Navy, continuing to face the dangers of the sea, now compounded by the threat of German U-boats. For these men, the adjustment was perhaps easier in some ways. One extreme environment exchanged for another, the clear purpose of survival replaced by the equally clear purpose of victory. But for others, the return to civilian life brought a peculiar kind of vertigo, a disorientation more subtle but no less profound than that experienced on the ice. How do you explain what you've seen, what you've endured, to those who remained in the warm world? The experience creates a divide that cannot be bridged by words alone. Family and friends listen politely to abbreviated accounts, respond with appropriate amazement, but cannot truly comprehend. The returned explorers find themselves in the paradoxical position of being simultaneously celebrated and isolated by their experiences. Physical reminders persist long after the return. Bodies shaped by extreme conditions carry the marks indefinitely. Fingers that ache in cold weather from old frostbite, joints that predict storms with their pain, digestive systems permanently altered by months of inadequate nutrition. These sensations serve as private touchstones, physical memories that connect the men to an experience that sometimes seems dreamlike in retrospect. The psychological imprints run deeper still. Many report a changed relationship with fear, not its absence, but a recalibration of what merits true alarm. After facing starvation, freezing, and drowning on a daily basis for months, the ordinary anxieties of civilized life seem pale and insubstantial. This can be both blessing and curse, allowing a certain equanimity in crisis, but sometimes creating distance from the concerns that animate those around them. Material comfort, once taken for granted, now carries complicated associations. A warm bed, abundant food, dry clothes, these simple pleasures trigger waves of gratitude mixed with an almost guilty awareness of their previous absence. Some find themselves unable to waste even the smallest amount of food, haunted by memories of desperate hunger. Others develop habits of checking exits, assessing resources, mentally calculating survival scenarios, even in safe environments. Relationships formed on the ice retain a special quality, different from friendships or even family bonds. The men who shared that experience stay connected by invisible threads of mutual understanding. They may not speak often, may not maintain regular correspondence, but the connection remains undiminished by time or distance. When they do meet, conversation often flows as if no time has passed, picking up threads of shared memory that need no explanation. Shackleton himself faces perhaps the steepest version of this hill, having achieved his greatest triumph in failure, bringing his entire crew home alive against impossible odds. He struggles to find purpose in the aftermath. The war provides temporary structure, as he serves in a minor diplomatic role in South America and later in a supply capacity in northern Russia. But these assignments feel hollow compared to the crystalline focus of Antarctica. He plans another expedition, the last of his life, with somewhat vague objectives about mapping coastlines and investigating mineral resources. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition had failed in its stated aims, but succeeded in the more fundamental goal of survival. This new journey seems to lack even that clarity of purpose. It is as if Shackleton is searching for something he cannot name, something he left behind on the ice. On January 5, 1922, the quest reaches South Georgia, the island Shackleton had crossed 6 years earlier in his desperate bid to save his men. Early the next morning, he suffers a fatal heart attack. His wife requests that he be buried there, on the edge of Antarctica, rather than return to England. It seems fitting somehow. The explorer laid to rest at the threshold of the continent that had defined and ultimately consumed his life. The other men of the Endurance continue their lives, each climbing their own version of the hill that follows such an experience. Some, like Frank Wilde and Frank Worsley, pursue further adventures in exploration or seafaring. Others return to the professions they had left behind: teaching, science, military service. A few leverage their experiences into writing or lecture careers, becoming professional storytellers of their own lives. For most, though, the Antarctic experience remains a private touchstone rather than a public identity, a chapter rather than the whole book of their lives. They marry, raise children, pursue careers, navigate the ordinary challenges of existence. From the outside, they might appear unremarkable, indistinguishable from countless other men of their generation. Only in quiet moments, perhaps, when something triggers a memory, a particular quality of light, a sudden drop in temperature, the grinding sound of ice in a glass, do they momentarily return to that frozen world. The hill that swallows the brave is the gradual slope of years that follow peak experience, the long, slow integration of the extraordinary into the context of an entire life. It requires its own kind of courage, less dramatic but no less real than that needed for survival in extremis. The men of the Endurance had to find ways to carry Antarctica within them without being defined or diminished by it, to honor the experience without becoming its prisoner. Perhaps most striking is how little bitterness emerges from their accounts. Despite enduring conditions that would break most humans, despite sacrificing years of their lives to an expedition that failed in its stated objectives, few express regret or resentment. There is pride in their survival, certainly, but also something more nuanced, a recognition that they had participated in something that transcended ordinary categories of success and failure. In later years, as the principal figures of the expedition age and die, the story begins its transformation from lived experience to historical account. Shackleton's leadership strategies become case studies in management seminars. The expedition's photographs, particularly those salvaged by Frank Hurley at great personal risk, transform into iconic images of exploration. The human drama of survival against impossible odds finds new audiences with each generation. But something essential is lost in this transition: the sensory reality of the experience, the minute-by-minute living of those days on the ice. No photograph, however striking, can capture the bone-deep cold that never relents. No written account, however detailed, can fully convey the psychological weight of isolation and uncertainty. No lecture or documentary can reproduce the complex mixture of fear, camaraderie, discomfort, beauty, and purpose that constituted daily life for those men. The private Antarctica, the one that existed in the minds and memories of those who were there, disappears with them. What remains is reconstruction, interpretation, the imperfect translation of experience into narrative. This too is part of the hill that swallows the brave, the knowledge that even the most extraordinary experiences eventually become stories told by others, shaped by the concerns and perspectives of those who weren't there. Time continues its patient work. The wooden cross marking Shackleton's grave on South Georgia weathers in the polar winds. The site of Patience Camp disappears beneath shifting ice. The ocean floor holds whatever remains of the Endurance, preserved in the freezing depths. The human participants return to the elements: Worsley, Wilde, Crean, and the others rejoining the cosmic cycle in the ordinary manner of mortality. But something persists beyond physical traces or personal memory. The story of the endurance has entered the cultural bloodstream, becoming part of how we understand human capacity in the face of overwhelming challenge. It represents a particular kind of triumph, not the simple victory of achievement, but the more complex success of survival with integrity, of maintaining humanity in conditions designed to strip it away. In this sense, the hill doesn't swallow the brave completely. Something escapes, something endures, not the men themselves. They are gone, but a distillation of their finest qualities, a template for human possibility. Each time the story is told, something of their experience lives again, transmuted into inspiration or insight for listeners who will never know the touch of Antarctic ice. You wouldn't last a day in their conditions, not a single day in the crushing cold, the endless dark, the isolating vastness of the polar environment. But in hearing their story, in contemplating their endurance, perhaps something of their resilience enters your understanding of what humans can withstand, can overcome. This transmission across time may be the final triumph of the endurance expedition, not just bringing all hands home alive, but bringing something of their spirit forward to touch lives they could never have known. The hill that swallows the brave is, in the end, not a final disappearance but a transformation of men into memory, of experience into narrative, of specific struggle into universal meaning. The ice releases its grip eventually, but never completely. It remains as a marker of human endurance, a benchmark for courage, a reminder of our capacity to face the void and return, changed but intact, to tell the tale. The men of the endurance expedition would not recognize their story as we tell it now, shaped as it is by a century of retelling, by changing values and perspectives, by the needs and concerns of audiences they could never have imagined. But they might recognize the essential truth, at its core, that human connection, purpose, and leadership can sustain life even in the most hostile environments, that the will to survive transcends material circumstance, that there is something in the human spirit that matches the implacable patience of the ice itself. Their Antarctica is gone, existing now only in fading photographs and second-hand accounts. But the journey continues in each retelling, in each new mind that encounters their story and finds in it something necessary for their own navigation of life's extremes. In this way, the hill does not swallow the brave completely. It transforms them into beacons, visible across the distances of time and experience, guiding others through their own dark passages. As you drift towards sleep, carried on the current of their story, perhaps you take with you some fragment of their resilience, some echo of their endurance, not the full weight of their experience that can never be transmitted completely, but a seed, a possibility, a reminder of what humans can withstand when there is no alternative. In this transmission, across the gulf of years and comfort, lies the final triumph of Shackleton and his men, not just surviving Antarctica, but helping us survive our own challenges through the example of their journey. The ice waits, patient and eternal. Antarctica endures, indifferent to the brief human drama that unfolded on its margins a century ago. But something of that drama remains alive in our collective imagination, a story we tell ourselves about who we are and what we can endure when pushed to our limits. In this way, the endurance expedition achieves a kind of immortality, outlasting its participants, speaking to generations they never knew, in a voice that grows not fainter, but clearer with the passage of time. Sleep now, carrying this story with you into dreams. The ice will be there waiting, eternal and patient, when you need to remember what humans can endure.